Because it came in, but there was good news today in terms of the DACA program. It's still being teased out. I haven't read the decision, obviously. I think it's Satish Kapoor, I think he's at CNN, maybe the New York Times, actually say that potentially this decision is not as definitive as we would want it to be in terms of protecting DACA. It's also, again, I think it's very interesting with some of these conservative majorities, like with Gorsuch. In this case, there was actually, a lot of corporate America was on the right side of this issue. They filed an amicus brief in support of DACA recipients. And Donald Trump is, of course, having a tantrum. I think the tweet was, "Does anybody get the feeling that the Supreme Court doesn't like me?" So I don't know. I think some of them like you just fine. But this is a CNN report on the SCOTUS ruling that Trump cannot end the DACA program. Right now, there are millions of human beings who have been subjected as part of this ongoing vicious war against migrants, against asylum seekers by the Trump administration. And this is one group that has been terrorized and used as a political pawn, and they can breathe a little bit easier today. And that's unequivocally a good thing. So let's watch this report and take that in.
Poppy, the Supreme Court has blocked the Trump administration's efforts and their plan to roll back DACA. That means that DACA will remain in place for now. The Supreme Court, I'm going over this opinion now, it decided that the rescission of DACA must be erased. That was something that the Trump administration tried to do, rescind DACA. The Supreme Court saying the Trump administration cannot do that, saying that the Department of Homeland Security was arbitrary and capricious in its decision to roll back this program. Now, this was argued over because the Department of Homeland Security initially issued a memo grounding this rescission on legal grounds rather than policy grounds. It was a later memo where then Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen actually said it was based on policy. But the Supreme Court saying here that the Department of Homeland Security did not roll this back in the right way, and therefore DACA must stand. This is no doubt a huge relief for those 700,000 plus DACA recipients. We have some of them outside the Supreme Court now, a very small number as opposed to how many were here back in November when this was argued. I spoke with some of the DACA recipients back in November, and they told me that this was crucial. Keeping DACA in place was crucial because they depended on it. One woman I spoke to had 2 young children who were born here in the United States. She was brought here when she was 14 years old. She lives and works on Long Island. She pays taxes. She has renewed her DACA status every 2 years. She feels like she is an American. And this was a program that was put in place by President Obama in 2012. So we're looking at 8 years of DACA recipients relying on this program. We're still looking into the exact vote count here. I still have to go through that. But we do know that at oral argument, Chief Justice John Roberts, he said that while the Trump administration may have been able to do this, perhaps if it was done in the right way, there also needed to be some humanitarian concerns here because these people, these DACA recipients, have relied on this program for the past 8 years. They've set up their life here. They work here. They pay taxes. They've had children here. So to all of a sudden roll this back really seemed like an inhumane injustice. And that was something that it seemed at the time of oral arguments in November that Chief Justice Roberts was trying to balance, to really look to that humanitarian response that we got. You know, I spoke with some of those dreamers. They marched here to the steps of the Supreme Court from New York City. They marched for days in oftentimes bad weather. It was raining actually the morning of oral arguments here. They were committed to this. They were passionate about this. And today, the Supreme Court handing them a win, saying that the Trump administration, as it was done, cannot, in fact, roll back the DACA program established by President Obama.
So that's positive news. And, you know, again, I think the thing that we have to be very careful of, especially as the liberal press reports this, and we're celebrating it along with them, just as we're celebrating the equity decision on trans rights as well. And Joanna Wiest has a brilliant piece in The Nation on basically, as the trans community celebrating that decision, and then also recognizing that at-will employment is still a fundamental threat to all workers, period. And of course, also to those that might be specifically discriminated against because of who they are. And so she has this piece on celebrating that victory and then looking to the shop floor and the street for like the broader wave of contextualizing it and building out like, ongoing substantive victories. And so I think this one is, again, it's incredibly positive. I mean, I know people personally that I know are going to breathe a lot easier because of it. And we need to connect it to a broader struggle. Okay. Brendan, you just sent this. I'll just read this real quick. For now, I guess this is from 538. And this is who is this? Stephen Yale Lohr at Professor of Cornell Law. For now, though, the justices have said that the Trump administration's rationale wasn't good enough. In September 2017, Trump announced that he would rescind DACA, but gave only a single reason, that the program was unconstitutional. The administration offered a second justification for ending that program later, but the court said the reasoning needed to come when the program was actually terminated. Roberts felt that the government didn't pay sufficient attention to what DACA means to its recipients, said Peter Margolis, a professor of William and Mary University of Law. These folks are interwoven in society and really don't have any other place that they can call home. That's what Trump is saying to the Trump administration. People have shaped their lives around this. That can't be ignored. This time, too, Roberts was clear that the court was not weighing whether or not DACA was a good or bad policy. We can only address whether the agency complied with the procedural requirement that would provide a reasoned explanation for its actions, he wrote in the opinion. The essential question then is whether the Trump administration followed the rules. It's a decision that administrative procedure nerds will love. That sounds contradictory to me, though, in the presentation, because, I mean, I understand that he wants a narrow reading on a technicality. And, God forbid this is like the Muslim ban where they come back with a more coherent reason that Trump hasn't spouted off with. But he is including the humanitarian variables in the same writing, in the same ruling, because he's asking and talking about people who've built their lives here. Mm-hmm. So that isn't just a technical question. I understand the reasoning is technical, that you haven't provided sufficient rationale. But just as that CNN report leaned into, of course, they're talking about the humanitarian implications. So I'm not terribly sure I see that, but I haven't read the whole decision.
I just want to say I agree with you. This is really good. I actually met a guy when I was in Mexico who had to self-deport because he got a DUI and they revoked his DACA, and he did not even remember Mexico. So obviously, this is going to be really good for a whole bunch of people. At the same time, we do need to watch out for the kind of discourse that's created when people predicate rights on folks being maybe the most sympathetic possible group of immigrants, right? You heard it in the CNN report. These are hardworking, tax-paying, law-abiding, English-speaking people when, you know what? Undocumented immigrants who are not perfect, who are not all of those things. I don't even want to say perfect because that's making a value judgment. Everybody deserves a basic level of safety and security and to not be rounded up and deported violently.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, again, we keep seeing this of the, there's the obvious PR reasons for leaning into, the most sympathetic folks, but that really isn't the point, as you say. And even, things like DACA have always sort of reminded me of again, other policies that obviously in the context of so much human suffering you support, like when there was a while where, actually this is pre-Obamacare, but it's like, covering all children. That's the health plan that's on tap. Of course, if you're in Congress, whatever, you're going to vote for that. Cover all children, 100%. The idea, though, that like, oh, well, kids will, their health is protected even though their parents are completely vulnerable is ridiculous. I mean, it's just a completely non-systems way of looking at how the world works. So, and people who are DACA recipients, they're, sometimes actually their families have status, other times they don't. But the idea that you can't, think of these things in terms of like broader family systems is a big problem, particularly because, in fact, the right does. That's why they were taking aim at so-called chain migration as an example.
It's the charity mindset.
Sorry?
It's just a charity mind, basically.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's a triangulation. That's
it's
very
a triangulation.
typical of the Obama era.
Very typical of longer. They've been triangulation. I mean, certainly the phrase was coined in the Clinton era, but arguably, I mean, the real flip in the Democratic Party is the Carter era. But yes, the Obama era definitely was a big refining of it. So